Today's video is sponsored by a good friend of the channel, Bootleg Greedo. Lord Xander the Collector versus Esika and the Prismatic Bridge, the first Sliver, and Nicol Bolas the Ravager. Decent hand for us. We can ramp into some decent stuff there and then just go for the wheel, worst case scenario. Drawing 2 Strionic Resonator on turn 1, we'll just get a tap land out. And already seen some fast mana. That is a Jeweled Lotus, so likely going for the Esika here. And they do. We get into another land, so I think we set up with the Swiftfoot Boots here. Might get into Lord Xander really quickly. A striking Sliver for the tribal player, that gives first strike. Altar of the Pantheon, some more mana for the 5 colour player. We get into a land, so we'll get down the Watery Grave. Play that in tapped because I'm just going to go for the Strionic Resonator here. Carry on setting up. Unfortunately, thanks to the Talisman, we see a turn 3 Nicol Bolas the Ravager, so we all have to discard a card here. Going to refill my hand most likely with the 2 cards in hand, so Geth's Grimoire can go down. The Sliver player discarded a Shadow Sliver, and it was a Ruinous Ultimatum for Esika. Esika playing Karametra, God of Harvests, so likely that this is a God deck. A Swan Song for us, which is decent protection. I'm actually going to risk getting down the Consecrated Sphinx here. We'll play and tap the Mana Crypt. Not going to be able to equip it with the Swiftfoot Boots, but we've got a wheel to refill our hand anyway, so we'll try and get some counter magic / removal out of our opponent's hand. Worst case scenario, we just refill our hand. Drew into 2 lands off the Grixis player. Well, already dealing with the Consecrated Sphinx. An Oath of Liliana, going to have us sacrifice our creature. At least the Consecrated Sphinx got removed without any targeted removal. That would have gone straight through the Swiftfoot Boots regardless. Now a Harmonic Sliver could get rid of one of our things. Alright, surprisingly going after the Talisman from the Grixis player. So they're back down to 4 mana. They can tap down that Cabal Coffers thanks to the Yavimaya. And more artifact removal. That is a Pier's Whim for the 5 colour player. So I think we just give up on the Strionic Resonator, unfortunately. And then it's really slow, but just to seem like less of a threat while our opponents seem like they may be concentrating on the Grixis player, I'm going to untap the Mana Vault here. Draw into Ancient Tomb. So play the Command Tower so that we can hold up the Swan Song. Sword of the Animist for Nicol Bolas. Equipping that and going into combat again. Once again, swinging 5 points of commander damage in towards us. They will get a Rampant Growth. Belligerent Sliver from the Sliver tribal player gives all the Slivers menace. And that also enters the field, triggering the Harmonic Sliver. And once again, going after that Grixis player. So, Sword of the Animist being blown up. Don't think Xander's being given much respect here, but I'm not going to complain about it. Yeah, definitely a God deck, the Scarab God from Esika now. They'll get a Rampant Growth from Karametra, as well as a Scry from the Path of Ancestry. Oh, and then with 0 cards in hand, going to attempt a Sterling Grove. They could get something that refills their hand, so I think we go for Swan Song onto Sterling Grove. And we've got 1 less player to worry about. Alright, but there's a Waste Not. So I'll tap down the Mana Rock and go for Lord Xander. We can equip the Swiftfoot Boots here. Let's show our opponents that we're focused on the other Grixis player as well. And we'll go after the Nicol Bolas, half his hand being discarded to the ETB. And we've drawn into Waste Not, which should go well with the wheel. So yeah, we'll play out the Waste Not, equip our commander with the Swiftfoot Boots. And then once we have our opponents discard a bunch of cards, we should get a lot of value out of that. Lord Xander swinging in here, and we'll continue to pick on the Nicol Bolas player. They should have a lot of removal and interaction in that deck, so we want to get rid of them as soon as we can. That has them mill at half of their library, so I'll just zoom in on the graveyard here and flick through it all if any of you care to pause and have a look. Yep, Nicol Bolas continuing to bully us out of the game, or try to. We do have to start looking at commander damage now because, yeah, currently on 13 puts us dangerously close. Managing to get rid of our board though. Nicol Bolas just went for a Toxic Deluge. So we'll point the Lord Xander at the Nicol Bolas for the death trigger. Oh, actually, that's non-land, isn't it? Yeah, okay. So that does nothing. Should have pointed that at the God player, and it would have got rid of the mana rock. I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference. Venom Sliver. We'll give all the Slivers poison. Scarab God went back to the hand, so just replaying that once again. And getting the same triggers as previously. Okay, but a mana drain from Nicol Bolas onto the Scarab God. So, using their interaction on each other, not too worried about Lord Xander. I really thought that this would be a 3-on-1 this game. So it might be that going slow with the whole Mana Vault thing is actually paying off really well for us. I'm going to untap it again. We'll actually need to if we want to have any chance of getting our commander back out. But it signals to our opponents that we're not going crazy as well. Draw into negate. So I think it's time to crack this Wheel of Fortune. We'll get some benefit from the Waste Knot, and obviously it refills our hand as well. Going to lose out on that negate, unfortunately. So Waste Knot triggers go on the stack, not too much discard there, about 7 cards discarded I think it was. Some creatures bin though, that is Sliver Overlord and Sliver Hive Lord as well, they're good ones to see the back of. So made some zombies and drew some cards as well. Have also drawn into Animate Dead. We've got more lands there than I'd like, so yeah, it's not ideal, but let's tap down the Mana Vault. Could have got down the Thran Dynamo if we had an extra land untapped. We'll tap that down and go for the Animate Dead and reanimate our own Consecrated Sphinx. Start really trying to draw into some cards. Can protect that with the Swiftfoot Boots as well. And then we've got blockers, so I'll continue to show my opponents that I'm looking in Nicol Bolas' direction still. Drawing some additional cards from the Sphinx, of course. Mana Drain is going to net them 5 mana here, thanks to countering the Scarab God. And of all the cards, we draw into Jingataxius, Talisman of Dominance, followed by a Signet, and yep, Consecrated Sphinx can't stay in play. That was a Damnation from the other Grixis player. And following that up with a Solemn Simulacrum. So accelerating their mana quite a lot this turn. Diffusion Sliver will near enough keep the Slivers from being targeted. Then Universal Automaton is a Sliver as well as every other creature type. And Metallic Sliver as well. I was surprised to see them cast Esika before, going for the Prismatic Bridge now for some free card advantage. And then down to 6 cards in hand, they get out another god, that is Athreos, God of the Passage. Does count as a creature on the stack, so Karametra will trigger. Not untapping the Mana Vault this time, so we do get pinged by that. Draw into Molten Echoes, which we will name Vampire with. Because we'll get a copy of Lord Xander from that, and then the copy will die to the Legendary Rule, and an opponent will have to sacrifice half of their non-land permanents. That's the aim there. So we'll continue to ramp here, let's get out the Thran Dynamo. Then we'll main phase this Necromancy so that we don't lose the creature. And that can bring out again the Consecrated Sphinx, going to make them remove it a 3rd time. And then it is Swiftfoot Boots. Now we've nothing else to do here, so I'll just decide to cast the Brewvac, ready for when Lord Xander starts milling our opponents. I'm going to continue to swing in at Nicol Bolas. They're proving themselves to be very resilient here, which is why I'm bullying them. Oh, maybe shouldn't have gone for Brewvac. We draw into Chaos Warp, as well as the Gilded Lotus. Oh, a Hostage Taker, that's not good. Luckily we've got Hexproof on the Consecrated Sphinx. They go after the Swiftfoot Boots though, so they'll be able to cast that from underneath the Hostage Taker. Oh wow, and they're only down to 1 card in hand, but that's quite a card to have. Agent of Treachery, and they're likely going to steal the Consecrated Sphinx. Won't be down on cards for long. So they draw 2 cards during the Sliver player's turn. And there we finally see the first Sliver. We'll cascade into something. And cascades into Taurian Mauler. I'll get a plus counter per spell that an opponent casts. Prismatic Bridge got them into a free Sanctum Weaver. So that's going to generate a lot of mana in a god deck. Consecrated Sphinx drawing Nicol Bolas cards once again. And then another god, Keranos, God of Storms. So it's a Rampant Growth from Karametra, and Taurian Mauler gets a plus counter. Okay, and surprisingly not swinging in with Karametra before that. A Supreme Verdict will deanimate it, as well as wiping out all the non-indestructible creatures. It's actually effectively a one-sided wipe for us, so I'm happy with that. Oh, and they actually got Sanctum Weaver back into hand thanks to the Athreos. So replaying that and animating the Karametra once again. But once again deciding not to swing in with it. It doesn't have Summoning Sickness, so yeah, I'm surprised that they didn't do that. Maybe worried about our Swiftfoot Boots and haste. Draw a Phantasmal Image once again for cloning our commander. I actually don't like the fact that our opponents have a decent amount of cards in hand, so while they're tapped out, we can go Gilded Lotus. And that unlocks 3 mana straight away, so that allows us into Jingataxias. And then we've got 1 mana floating, so we can go for Swiftfoot Boots onto there. And I'm not going to swing in with my creature either, because I'm worried about some big gods swinging in. Maybe we can chump block. So I'll get through to the end of the turn, of course. Do not have an unlimited hand size here, but we're going to draw 7 regardless. So I think we're doing okay for mana. I'll get rid of Burnished Heart, a couple of lands, Chromatic Lantern. Molten Echoes is just going to be too slow and expensive for us, I think. And we've got Phantasmal Image, so we'll get rid of the Glasspool Mimic as well. Well, that's Field of the Dead for Nicol Bolas. Oh wow, and Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, is going to come into play for Nicol Bolas here, and they draw 4 cards and have an Annihilator next turn. We get a bunch of triggers because they have to discard their entire hand thanks to Jingataxias at the end of the turn, so Waste Not going to trigger again. Can't make use of this mana, unfortunately. We do make more zombie chump blockers and draw some more cards though. Sliver Queen into play this time, so they're getting into all the 5-colour legendary Slivers here. And once again they discard the remaining cards in their hand, and one of which is going to draw us into a Mana Crypt apparently. Prismatic Bridge throws out a free Heliod, God of the Sun. Revealed a Polluted Delta off the top with Keranos, so they got to draw a card with that. Throwing down a Bojuka Bog, so exiling our graveyard with that. Not really too worried about Bojuka Bog in all fairness. God number 5 is Xenagos, God of Revels. Will give a creature haste as well as doubling its power and toughness. Sneaking down a Bident of Thassa as well, which can help keep them in cards. Can tap down all of our creatures with it as well, which could be a problem. And speaking of card draw, that is a Honden of Seeing Winds. Emptying their hand obviously because Jingataxias is about to do it for them. Go Shintai of Boundless Vigour. Will put plus counters on itself. And then can't do anything with the last card in hand, so tapping out into Heliod to make a 2/1 Vigilance token. Xenagos triggers and is pointed at the Keranos, which doesn't have trample thankfully. And once again being really reserved there and not turning in sideways. I thought we'd get a lot more pressure than this with this board state, in all honesty. I was actually hoping that we'd get a really good target for the Rite of Replication, but there's a bunch of legendaries in play. So let's throw out the Solemn Simulacrum. It's only a matter of time before those gods barrel in towards us, so I think an army of Solemn Simulacrums is on the menu here. Those 5 Solemns trigger once a piece, of course, so we'll get the remaining 4 basics from our graveyard, or from our library even. And now I think we'll just hold up mana for the Chaos Warp and whatever else we're about to draw into with Jingataxias. Drawing into more clone effects in Spark Double and Twin Flame, so could set up some stuff with Lord Xander. Can discard the Anger for obvious reasons. That will give all of our stuff haste for the rest of the game, as long as it remains in the bin. Bolas is passing priority, trying to get straight through to the combat phase, so yeah, I have a pretty good idea of where that Kozilek is going. I'm just going to Chaos Warp it now. Chaos Warp them into a Shadow Spear, which could be relevant against the gods actually. Wasn't too sure about doing that in all honesty. The problem is Kozilek being in the library means that we can't mill them out. But what we can do is try to beat them whilst they've got more limited resources with only a 21 card library. And that is a Vandal Blast, so yeah, so much for our Solemn army. So much for our Mana Rocks as well actually. I'm glad I got all those lands out. So we get 6 Solemn Simulacrum triggers, which will draw us 6 cards. One of which is Drown in the Loch, that's good. And speaking of good, there's a Cyclonic Rift as well, so we can rift our opponents and then have them discard their entire hands that we just rifted back to them. With the Jingataxius, that'll be good against the God player, I think. And there we see Nicol Bolas back into play once again. So we'll just discard the Talisman. Don't need to be playing any more rocks, I don't think. Speaking of rocks, a Sol Ring for the Sliver player. And it seems as though they're just dumping mana into the Sliver Queen, making a bunch of baby Slivers. Esika on the stack, as well as Honden. They get themselves a free Heliod Sun Crowned, and then draw 2 cards to the Honden. They're also revealing the top card with Keranos, so they get to draw a card here, because they revealed a Swamp. Dropping their own Mana Vault. And a Smothering Tithe. Not really too worried about them getting into a bunch of mana now, especially when they're not going to have any cards in hand. I'll hold on to this Drowning the Loch for as long as possible. Xenagos being pointed at Heliod. Our opponent might try and go wide on us here. Oh wow, okay, we've hit really lucky against our opponents here. Yeah, we're not getting the respect that we probably should. Nicol Bolas has no cards in hand, so they should probably be swinging in at us really. We're at a low life total, they could get pretty close to getting rid of us. But looking to take out Nicol Bolas instead, I don't agree with that decision. Heliod going to give lifelink to as many creatures as they can here. And Nicol Bolas is blocking the Athreos, which has 4 toughness, so they could get rid of that with the Shadow Spear. Awesome, and they do activate Shadow Spear on their way out, so taking down a god with them. They go down to only -1, surprisingly. I thought it would be worse than that. Heliod triggering a bunch of times on the life gain, so distributing some plus counters. And discarding an Ancient Tomb is going to give us some black mana from the Waste Knot, so that's a good time for us to get down the Notion Thief, actually. So tap down some mana, go for the Notion Thief. Okay. Well, I thought I tapped down the mana in time, and it's... Okay, it's taken us through to the upkeep here. I must have passed through it by accident or something. Should have had a Notion Thief out there. I think a good idea would be to go for the Propaganda here. Make it more difficult for the gods to swing in at us. They've got a load of mana, but it will still cost them to swing in a bunch at us and go wide. And then if we go for the play that I should go for here, I should go for Cyclonic Rift and try and get the god player to discard all of their gods from their hand, especially once they've just tapped in a bunch of mana into Propaganda. But I mean, you can see that in a million different games. It's a really easy thing to pull off, so let's actually try and get something going with Lord Xander here, just for the interest of the video. So Xander coming into play. Everyone's hands are empty, so we'll get them to discard half of the 0 cards in their hand. We'll go Phantasmal Image. That goes onto our commander, and we'll keep the original. That puts 2 Lord Xander triggers on the stack. We've got the ETB, which we're not particularly worried about. That's the discard one. And then Phantasmal Image died to the legendary rule, so that does count as Lord Xander dying. And that means that the god player has to sacrifice half their non-land permanents here. So they should lose a bunch of devotion to this and deanimate a bunch of gods, even if they do get to keep quite a few of them. Okay, yeah, that looks way better. So, like I said, they've got some gods in play still, but we can chump block a lot better with that now. Jingataxius going to draw us 7 again. Going down to 30 cards in the library, we'll have to be careful of that. Getting to some free counter magic though, so that's really good. We'll discard the Toxic Deluge. Heliod quickly making a Cleric token on the upkeep of the Sliver player. Oh, that's an awesome top deck. Realm Walker is going to allow them to cast Slivers off the top of their library if they're lucky. Not seeing any more Slivers unfortunately, so I'm assuming that it's the case that they don't actually have one on top. Prismatic Bridge round once again, and this time into God Eternal Oketra. That's awesome. So that actually animates a couple of their gods again, unfortunately. Then Hour of Promise is usually Field of the Dead. Would make sense in a 5-colour deck. Maybe the World Tree and Field of the Dead. No, just going for even more mana. That is Cabal Coffers and Urborg. Xenagos being pointed at God Eternal Oketra. So, yeah, starting to swing in at us now. This is what they should have done last turn, I think. And then tapping down some mana, they give lifelink to the God Eternal Oketra because it has double strike. Well, unfortunately for them, we are going to go for Drown in the Lock now. And that will deanimate some gods, as well as killing off God Eternal Oketra. That one's not indestructible. So successfully landing that, we've still got the Karametra barreling in towards us. God Eternal Oketra can go 2 from the top. And yeah, putting that 3rd from the top in their library. So we'll just chump the remaining god that's swinging in at us with the zombie token. So let's start doing some cloning shenanigans with Lord Xander finally. We'll play Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. That one will not have legendary. Get the ETB trigger. They've got 0 cards in hand, so not all that useful to us. And then we can go for Phyrexian Metamorph as well. I'll pay the 2 life into that, teetering at just above 10 life. But that copies the Sakashima version, which does not have legendary, so we've got a 3rd Lord Xander. Our opponents are going to really struggle wiping the board and allowing us to attack in here. Fortunately for them, actually don't have too many good attacks. So I think we just have to play it safe and hold back on this Cyclonic Rift. Drawing with Jingataxius again, going down to 22 cards in the library. Draw Mana Drain, that's awesome. Maddening Cacophony is decent as well, if we need to get a mill win. Virulent Sliver coming down once again, giving all the Slivers poison. Okay, and surprisingly, those Sliver tokens swinging in at the God player. So maybe they're just trying to have fun at this point. All of those creatures being blocked by the God player, so they just lose their Slivers. And then the Sliver Queen giving birth to more babies again. Prismatic Bridge landing our opponent, and Enchantress in Sithis Harvest's Hand. So that reanimates the green and white gods once again, making a bunch of mana from the Cabal coffers with 2 cards in hand. And they've got back into God Eternal Oketra, so playing that out again, getting another Rampant Growth from Karametra. And then playing Nylea, that could be some decent card advantage for them. Triggering the Sithis, gaining a life and drawing a card. Triggering Oketra will get them a 4/4 zombie. And then whenever they gain life, they get a plus counter from the Heliod, so Sithis and Heliod going really well together. Keep activating Go Shintai here, but they're not having the best of luck revealing creatures with it. In fact, I don't think they revealed a single creature there, unfortunately. That's really unlucky for them. They go through to the beginning of combat steps, so giving God Eternal Oketra a buff and haste. That is an 8/11 with double strike and vigilance. And swinging that in at the Sliver player, so not wanting to swing in towards Xander for obvious reasons. That's the only creature they're bothering to swing in with here, so just staying back on defense. Heliod will give that lifelink. And the Sliver player deciding to chump, so they'll only get the first strike damage from Oketra. That jumps them up to 78 life though, and they get another trigger from the Heliod, putting a plus counter on Oketra. Alright, so 0 cards in both of my opponent's hands. Let's go for a little trick here. Malakir Rebirth can go onto the original Xander. And that's going to bring it straight back once it's killed off. Then we can go for High Market and sacrifice the original commander. We'll leave it in the graveyard so that the Malakir Rebirth will bring it back tapped. Because that died, it will have the God player sacrifice half of their stuff. That's a shame. They decide to scoop to that, that's fair enough. Yeah, we'll probably win in next turn, so yeah, it's just a shame we don't get to take them out with any mill or anything like that. We'll try that on the Sliver player though. And then we will go with the original plan, Cyclonic Rift them. If the Lord Xander thing didn't have them scooped, then Cyclonic Rift would have. Drop ourselves the Mana Confluence we've just drawn into. We've got Counter Magic backup for anything they could do here, but obviously we know they've got 0 cards in hand. We'll go for Twin Flame. And that's going to cost us 8 mana, but we're about to swing in with 6 Lord Xanders, which will mill their library by half 6 times, which effectively leaves them with no cards. And that's a shame. Yeah, they decide to scoop to that as well. They're losing this turn anyway. But like I said, what we're doing here is going for Twin Flame onto the 3 Lord Xanders, which will give us 6 of them. Oh, actually, we'd only get to keep 2 of them, wouldn't we? We'd only get to keep 2 of the non-legendary ones. So that would be 5 Lord Xanders. So anyway, we swing in with the 5 copies of Lord Xander, and that will mill their library 5 times by half. So they go down from 71 to 35, and then 35 down to 17, 17 down to 8, and then 8 down to 4, and yeah, assuming that they don't have a means of shuffling, then they are pretty much done for as far as I can tell. Our opponents went a little bit easy on us there, but I think they were worried about the Nicol Bolas player, as they should be. But yeah, you can't leave a Lord Xander player alone either, apparently. Be sure to consider donating on Patreon if you appreciate the time and effort that I'm putting into these videos. Massive thank you to the patrons who support already. I'm tribalkai. Thank you for watching.